In the year 2020, you guys saw that for this channel, it was basically the year of Final Fantasy VII. A year later, we now have a PS5 version of the Final Fantasy VII Remake with a smooth 60 frames per second, fast loading screens, and the focus of today's video, a PS5 exclusive DLC called INTERmission, which is a side story featuring Yuffie. Yuffie was an optional character in the original game. Because of lack of time and the development of the original game, Yuffie and Vincent were going to be cut. However, some of the staff were against the idea, and Jun Akiyama, forgive me if I butchered that name, who was the event planner for the original, and he had a strong attachment to Yuffie, so they became optional characters as a result. Which does lead me to believe they were going to be permanent party members, and I'm sure they will be in future parts of the remake. If you watched my Dirge of Cerberus review, you know Vincent had an important role in Sephiroth's backstory, and as for Yuffie, well, let's talk about her starting now. On the planet Gaia, Yuffie is from Wutai, which is based on Eastern countries in our world. Wutai was an independent nation until Shinra wanted to establish a Mako reactor as a way of extracting Gaia's natural resources to be used. Wutai, however, opposed this, so Wutai and Shinra went to war. Wutai ended up becoming a resort town for tourists after the war, but Yuffie was not having this. The side story starts with Yuffie in Midgard, taking place between the time Cloud fell in Era's church in the slums from Mako Reactor 5 to the plate falling on the Sector 7 slums. Actually, you know what? The story here is pretty simple. Yuffie just wants to infiltrate the Shinra Corporation, steal materia to bring Wutai back to its former glory, but does not find it and ends up being a wild goose chase because the materia was not developed at this time. As for what materia, well, the DLC does not really go into detail on that. That's it. And with a new post-credits scene where Cloud and company go to Calm, in which I'm betting part 2 will start with Cloud telling his party about the Nibelheim incident, as he remembered at that moment, that is. As for my opinion on this side story, well, you guys know how much I love Final Fantasy, so this is kind of a biased opinion on my part. Starting with Yuffie. I noticed that my FF7 characters tier list video is one of my most watched videos on this channel, so you guys know I'm not really a big fan of Yuffie because in the original game, all she wanted was materia. She even steals Cloud and his buddies' materia as well as outsmarting and tricking them, but gives it back eventually. But deep down, she still wanted the materia. I remember that contract Yuffie wanted Cloud to sign that once the adventure's over, is to give her all the materia. Although in the compilation, I would say she fared a bit better. Of course, in Crisis Core, all she wanted was treasure, but in Advent Children, she was willing to help Cloud fight Sephiroth by lending him materia and cared about Vincent in Dirge of Cerberus. In this side story though, well, she still is after materia, but after finishing this, I had a better sense of what her personality is like. This episode really emphasizes her youthful personality and well, even is a bit clumsy, but adds more charm to her. I would not say she goes through character development in this story per se, but I do feel like I know her as a character better. I would move her higher on my tier list because of it, and I feel that Square Enix did her character justice. But you know, she would go from D to C because, well, I have a preference for other characters still, and if you're a Yuffie fan, comment below what you think. She partners with Sonon, which yeah, I figured he'd be a one-off character when I first saw him. He actually dies when you beat the story. In fact, there's several one-off characters in this episode, such as Billy Bob. I heard there's always room for a Bob. But this episode is pretty short. You could beat it in like 5 hours, but I'd say they did a pretty good job on Sonon with the amount of time given. He experiences character development in which he loses his younger sister Melfi in the war. Sonon, I would say, is a stoic guy, but not too stoic because I had a chuckle at a funny moment where Yuffie screamed at a mouse with a monster nearby and Sonon's there having a facepalm moment. Then there's Scarlet, the director of the weapons department at Shinra. When I first played the OG Final Fantasy VII, I did not even notice Scarlet was there. That is until she has that slap fight with Tifa on the Mako cannon on Disc 2. Oh man, I can't wait to see that with modern graphics and 4K. Scarlet, I would say, is the main antagonist of this DLC, and well, she's a rather simple character. She's a Shinra executive with a dominatrix personality. I am glad Square Enix gave a really minor character like her time in the spotlight. But the final boss of this DLC is actually Nero from Dirge of Cerberus. Deep Ground Soldiers also makes an appearance, and so does Vice before, well, Hojo uploaded his consciousness through the internet and basically lives on through Vice. And that's really all there is to say about them, because this episode just basically says, oh look, here's Nero, Vice, and Deep Ground. I did enjoy this little side story, although unless the remake does something that makes this DLC important in the future, the story is really kind of more fan service for Final Fantasy VII fans at the moment, and hardcore fans will know Deep Ground because of Dirge of Cerberus. I definitely enjoyed the Final Fantasy VII remake as a whole, but with the way the base game ends and this DLC, I can't tell if Square Enix has plans for Deep Ground or if this is fan service for hardcore fans, so I'm also in a spot where I gotta see how things play out before I finalize my opinion. The rules are the same as the base game, only you play as Yuffie exclusively. You do have another party member who is Sonon, but you do not control him, you only issue commands to him. For those of you familiar with Chrono Trigger, you can also do dual text with these two. As someone who is not the biggest Yuffie fan, I gotta say Yuffie's gameplay is pretty solid. She can do melee attacks and can also attack enemies from a distance by throwing her shuriken. My favorite thing is using elemental ninjutsu abilities, which gives her elemental base attacks to her shuriken. For example, since electronics are weak against thunder, you can make her shuriken do lightning-based attacks. If she were with Cloud and the rest of them, this would actually be a pretty broken mechanic, as it negates the need for some magic materia and it does not use MP, but with 1.5 characters that you can control, it makes sense. Also, I played this episode a second time on hard mode, and let me tell you, you can't use items in hard mode, meaning there's no way to use ethers. Ethers replenish MP. There are a couple of quests, kind of like the Merc quest in this side story, but a minigame that was added is Fort Condor. In the original game, Fort Condor was a real-time strategy game where you defend your base. This DLC, on the other hand, there's two sides, your side and your opponent's. You defend your base while invading your opponent's as well. It's basically destroy your opponent's base and you win. I definitely thought I was going to have to wait until parts 2 or 3 to play this, but it's nice to see it here. I did find it unnecessary, however, to play the same players again on hard mode to get the trophy, because I actually found this game easier on hard mode because New Game Plus. The only 4 Condor players who gave me trouble were Wedge and Chadley. Ramu, good to see you again, buddy. Looking good. I think the entire game itself looks great. Sure, last year people complained about the low-res textures, and well, the PS5 version fixes some of those textures, and I do see that the NPCs have been touched up on as well. However, I still see a low-res texture here and there still, and playing on my 4K TV, I saw a couple of 1080p textures that looked good on PS4 but have yet to be updated to 4K. It's not a glaring issue, I did not notice it when I played it on PS4 last year, but the character models of the main characters look fantastic. As for voice acting in INTERmission, I think Yuffie and Scarlet sound great, but I have some critiques for some of the other characters. Sonon's voice fits his body build, but I do not know. To me, he also sounds older than he actually is.
Let's take a different tack.
Nero, I would say, has a fitting voice and good dialogue, but he talks too quietly, I found.
Fool, there are no teams in Deep Ground.
I had to adjust some in-game audio settings to be able to hear them. The new music is also pretty good, although it does not quite reach the heights of the base game in my opinion, but I loved hearing the Fort Condor theme, as I thought I was going to have to wait years to hear the remix version. And Yuffie's battle theme is pretty catchy, and I like some of the music that plays inside the Shinra building. I give this DLC an 8 out of 10, but if I was less of a fan than I was, it would be a 7. You guys know me, I would take whatever excuse to play and talk about Final Fantasy VII. As a fan, it's more content for me to enjoy while I wait for part 2. If you do not have a PS5 though, you would want to play this if you're a fan, but if you're not so much a fan and more of a casual, I would not stress out on not being able to get a PS5 for this. This DLC is really the kind of thing fans would jump in on, but for people who are not quite as big of fans, it's something to play because it's there, basically. Yuffie is fun to play as, and it's nice to see Dirge Cerberus characters in today's graphics, but it's a pretty short DLC and does not really add too much to the main story, as Yuffie's role in this is a wild goose chase. Unless Square Enix has big plans for Deep Ground. Also, I guess that explains why in the original game you meet Yuffie in a forest not too long after leaving Midgar. The story is 5 hours, and if you want to complete it, it's an additional 15 hours. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And ring that bell as well. Have a good night, and take care.